Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. What's been great about having she on our team is that she brings, as she said, decades of industrial experience to the work that we're doing. I've just done the Today programme where they were interviewing a billionaire soon after me, and he made some expressions about our policies, and I said, look, he clearly has got this wrong. So I've invited him to tea, and the Today programme just said he's accepted, so I said, okay, but I'll pay. We're launching today a report on rewriting the rules of the economy. It's a summary of the work that we've been doing for a period of time, setting out some of our ideas, and I'll take you through them this morning, and then we'll have some questions. Most of you will remember that during the referendum campaign, the slogan, "Taking Back Control," was mobilised to great effect. I think because people rightfully felt that they had little or no control over much of their lives. And for many, this is no more so than control over their workplace and their working lives. And it's true, decisions are made about the companies or services they work in, over which they have no say or little influence. Their wages and conditions of employment are often imposed upon them rather than agreed. And the major decisions about the operation, the organisation, the investment, and even the future of their firms are often made without them having a voice in the decision. Companies are sold and takeovers take place where employees often feel as though they're treated as virtual chattels in the process. The privatisation also of major public utilities has meant that both the workers but also the consumers and passengers have no effective direct role in shaping the delivery of the services they provide or they depend upon. And what regulation does exist has generally proved to be ineffective. The Conservatives' vision, she has mentioned, the Conservative vision of a post-Brexit deregulated economy threatens to undermine what protections and controls that currently exist. So what we're saying today is Labour will rewrite the rules of our economy. It's all about treating people fairly and with respect, the respect that they deserve. Today's business model of shareholder domination is increasingly proving to be incompatible with not just the fair and respectful treatment of workers, but also the responsibilities associated with any organisation operating within a democracy. So Labour's reforms to how our large businesses and public utilities are governed and owned and regulated, and how both workers and consumers are represented, we believe will genuinely enable them to take back control. So today we've published the report summarising the extensive work we've been undertaking with others on a comprehensive reform programme for corporate governance. We aim to take on the excesses of the shareholder model and lay some of the foundations of a stakeholder economy. It's something some of us have been talking about for over 30 years. Our argument is that under the existing system, the unfettered pursuit of profit maximisation has been allowed to override all other considerations at times, whether it's the care of the company's employees, their wages, pensions, or conditions of employment, in some instances even their health and safety, or actually also whether it's the social and environmental consequences of a company's operations. There have just been too many examples which have demonstrated that the relentless pursuit of shareholder value has been to the detriment of workers, consumers, communities, and yes, our environment. The litany recently of Carillion, BHS, Thomas Cook, they're just the recent examples of what happens when short-termism and corporate greed rule the roost. So several studies have shown on short-termism that how the short-term focus of many companies, shareholders and executives is the major reason for the poor performance of our economy overall. Too often, corporate greed, forcing short-term profit-taking, overrides good business sense. In our report, we assert a basic principle. that companies form part of our society and are valued elements of our society, but they must abide by the same norms and rules as set for the rest of us. We want good businesses that make long-term decisions and create sustainable jobs. But the problem is that shares are actually now held for less than a year on average, and chief executive officers rarely last more than 5 years. And the pressure to maximize returns at all costs has often persuaded executives to boost dividends at the expense of stable and sensible long-term investment. Those businesses that do take a long-term and responsible view, in our view, should not be undercut or disadvantaged by those that don't play by the rules. So we believe a new business model is needed. And at the heart is our belief that every business should be a partnership between employees and customers, management and shareholders for the long-term success of the enterprise. Many European countries have been developing more robust systems of partnership to secure long-term decision-making in the UK, and it's to those examples we've looked. So in government, Labour will rewrite the Companies Act so that directors have a duty to promote the long-term interests of employees, customers, the environment, and the wider public, as well as shareholders. The group with the longest term stake in a company is actually usually the workers. And yet in this country, worker representation and participation in decision-making is extremely limited still. We've already announced that a third of a company's board membership will be workers. But we want to supplement this by giving larger companies the choice of adopting a unitary board system or a two-tier board structure. The unitary board includes elected stakeholder representation. The two-tier board comprises an executive board responsible for the day-to-day operations and a supervisory board made up of stakeholders such as customers, employees, and yes, long-term investors. The supervisory board will have an overall power to steer the direction of the company. We'll also explore and consult on incentives to encourage longer-term shareholding. Some of you will know in France, shareholders holding their shares for more than 2 years have strengthened voting rights, and we'll explore those ideas. In line with our commitment to building a stakeholder economy, we aim to broaden the ownership base of UK businesses to give workers more of a, not just a say, but a stake in the company. There's evidence to show that this not only advances long-term decision-making, but actually all the evidence points to it boosts productivity as well. So we've announced the introduction of inclusive ownership funds in which larger companies will be required to transfer 1% of their shares into an employee fund until the fund owns 10% of the company. Shares would be owned collectively by the employees, with dividends payments distributed up to a maximum per employee per year. I see actually in the USA now, Bernie Sanders is advocating a 20% transfer. The private companies may not have shares. Private companies may have shares but do not issue dividends. So as an alternative, Labour will ensure that these companies introduce a profit-sharing scheme that would achieve equivalent results. Independent assessments have estimated that this fund policy could raise about $2 billion for workers in 5 years, with an average annual payout per worker of £181. Payments above the £500 cap will go to a climate apprenticeship fund to train the skilled workers needed for our Green New Deal to tackle climate change. Tackling the threat of climate change, the existential threat of climate change, is Labour's overriding priority when we enter government. If we are to meet the climate change target to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, we need to ensure that companies are also working alongside government. Many now are. But business bodies themselves are calling for companies to improve climate-related financial reporting and for all companies to bring forward their decarbonisation plans, and we support those proposals. But for those companies not taking adequate steps under Labour, we believe they should be delisted from the London Stock Exchange. And the Corporate Governance Code and legislation will be amended to set out minimum standards for listing related to evidence the action being taken to tackle climate change. In other countries, other measures are proposed which set standards for companies on their listing procedures. We'll adopt a similar approach. There's a real issue, though, about excessive pay as well we have to address. Disparities in pay between senior executives and other employees have become, well, extreme to the point of what some have described as obscene in recent years. If someone gave you £1 every 10 seconds, it would take you more than 300 years to become a billionaire. Someone on the national minimum wage would have to work 69,000 years to be paid £1 billion. We have 150 billionaires in this country. A newly qualified nurse would have to wait 50,000 years. No one needs or deserves to have that much money, and it is obscene. But it's also obscene, by the way, that these billionaires are buying access and tax breaks to Boris Johnson's Conservative Party. We know whose side Boris Johnson is on. He said it. The billionaires and the bankers and big exploitative corporations. Whilst Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, let's be clear, are on the side of the people. We're offering real change for our country, putting wealth and power in the hands of the many, not just the few. The High Pay Centre described how after just 3 working days in 2019, the UK's top executives made more money than the full-time worker, typical full-time worker, will earn in the entire year. The pay of the average FTSE 100 CEO has risen from 60 times their average employee to 150 times in 2017. And we've seen how long-term incentive plans set by remuneration committees have resulted in sharp increases in executive pay and bonus packages over recent years. And you know, on gender pay still, 8 out of 10 companies pay male employees more than women still. The pay gap also exists between different ethnicities, with a percentage difference in the median hourly pay between the people of a white ethnicity and all those belonging to an ethnic minority group in London at 21.7%. Cannot be right. It cannot be right that we have these levels of discrimination still, both on gender and race within our society and our economy. We believe that the wealth of a company is the result of the collective endeavour of all its workers, whether at the top or at the bottom, and that wealth should be shared more equitably. That's why Labour is committed to introduce an excessive pay levy on companies and will bring in a 20-to-1 pay ratio between the lowest and highest paid employees in the public sector. We'll also move towards a 20-to-1 pay ratio between the lowest and highest paid employees in companies bidding for public sector contracts. A 20-to-1 ratio means someone earning the living wage, just over £16,000 a year, it would permit an executive to be earning nearly £350,000 a year. All large companies will be required, as part of annual reporting, to disclose the ratio of total CEO remuneration to median employee pay, and the steps they're taking to reduce it. Directors will be required to explicitly state in their annual report that no employee has received pay less than the real living wage, which will be a statutory requirement under a Labour government. We'll ensure that all executive remuneration packages in large companies are subject to an annual binding vote by shareholders and stakeholders, including employees and consumers. Companies must also set out their policy for tackling the gender and ethnicity pay gap and outline the progress made since the last report and their renewed target to reduce it. We will ensure that companies are prevented also from neglecting pension deficit recovery payments. in order to deliver executive bonuses, dividends, and pay. Pensions will be protected. When it comes to company audits, we know company audits are vitally important for determining corporate accountability. But the dominance of the big four accountancy firms means that, according to a recent report by the House of Commons Library, auditors are unable to deliver the independent and robust audits, and the auditing industry lacks competition. The big four are now too big to fail. Auditing firms have also a variety of conflicts of interest. They must win and retain engagements from companies in order to generate revenue, but at the same time, they must objectively scrutinize the company's reports. Under Labour, the big four companies will not be allowed to continue to act like a cartel. The audit business of all accounting firms should be structurally separate, and auditors prevented from selling any non-auditing services. Labour will establish a new statutory body to conduct audits. Its purpose will be to conduct real-time audits of banks, building societies, credit unions, insurers, and major investment firms. The auditor will not be dependent on fees from client companies, and as a result, could become, I believe, independent and robust. Through this new statutory body, the regulator will be able to enforce prudential financial reporting practices and change the culture and practices, I believe, at financial enterprises. Audit tenders should be publicly available, and auditor files should be available for stakeholder scrutiny. Members of the audit team should not be allowed to join the staff of the audit client for 5 years after ceasing to be a member of the audit team. And large companies must be required to change audit firms, partners, and entire audit staff at least once every 5 years. We're also saying that auditing firms will not be permitted to write their own accounting, auditing, and financial report rules. Accounting trade associations must not be permitted to write accounting rules for business controlled by their members. We'll regulate to ensure that auditing firms provide socially useful information about their operations, including information about offshore links, captive insurance companies, political links, audit failures, cooperation with regulators, regulatory action, lawsuits, and yes, profits from practices that have been deemed unfair. The Competition and Markets Authority, or the relevant regulatory authority, will examine the auditing industry at 5-yearly intervals until such time its structure and practices change to secure a high degree of competition and choice, to deliver value for money and high-quality auditors to protect stakeholders overall. Finally, we want to construct a new regulatory architecture. A Labour government will undertake a much-needed overhaul of our system of regulation, and the purpose is to ensure that it serves the public interest. Our report describes what has been depicted as a confusing, labyrinthine system of regulation. I just give the example, there are at least 41 financial sector regulators. A separate set of dispute resolution bodies exists as well. And the public is poorly represented on the boards of these regulators. The RBS Global Restructuring Group fiasco highlighted flaws across the regulatory architecture, including amongst insolvency partners. The collapse of Carillion in 2018, scandals at Tesco, HBOS, and in relation to tax avoidance. They've posed serious questions about the regulatory system and even regulatory negligence. And parliamentary committees and the media are having to fill the gap left often by the inadequacy of regulation. All in all, the regulatory bodies appear to be failing to protect us all and protect society. So yes, Labour will legislate for this new architecture, a business commission containing a companies commission, finance commission, and enforcement commission. This, we believe, will close the gaps in regulation and establish a more robust and independent regulatory system. The Business Commission will integrate the accounting, auditing, and insolvency and financial sector regulators. All the commissions will have open meetings and publicly available minutes, agendas, correspondence, and working papers. An independent ombudsman will adjudicate on disputes between regulators and stakeholders. And yes, Labour will commit to parliamentary select committees having oversight of the Business Commission overall. We believe that our corporate model that currently exists is not serving our economy and the environment or wider society. Labour in government will institute a radical overhaul of UK company law and practice in order to bring about real change in the corporate sector. Our comprehensive reform programme will bring about greater democracy, justice and accountability to the world of business. And we describe this in the report as a step change in corporate governance and regulation that will support efforts to tackle the climate emergency and improve long-run economic performance. And yes, realise greater equality across our society. Let me be clear, I pay tribute to all those businesses and enterprises that form the backbone of our economy and make their important contributions to our society. Our aim is to strengthen them. Our aim is to strengthen good business practice whilst we drive out the poor and the bad. We believe this new architecture of corporate governance and regulation has the potential to lay the foundations of the successful, dynamic economy we need serving our whole community. It's the foundations of a genuine stakeholder economy. Thank you very much. That was a volume.
Fantastic.
That was a heck of a volume of stuff there, okay? We're going to break up into workshops in a minute. No.
And you will be tested. Now, we've got some time for questions, and I'm sure there are many. Can I get it? We'll start off, actually, if it's okay, we'll start off with questions from the press, from the media who are here. Is there any questions from the media? Some hands. Right, we'll take them in groups of 4. And if we could take, groups of 3, the first 3. So the gentleman, the lady, and the lady behind. Yeah. Could you stand up and say who you are, please?
Mr. McDonnell, Tom Rayner here from Sky News. The Green Party have launched their manifesto today, and they've committed to reducing carbon emissions to net zero by 2030, a target that your party say you are working towards, but they're pledging £100 billion a year for 10 years in order to do that. Is that price wrong, or do you think that is what you would need to pay if you want to get to net zero by 2030?
Fantastic. And could you pass the mic to us?
Heather Stewart from The Guardian. You talked about your new regulatory architecture. And you mentioned a finance commission as part of that. I just wondered where regulation of the banking sector fits in with that. Does it come under this new umbrella, or does it remain separate?
Great. I think there was a woman behind, was there?
Harry York from the Daily Telegraph. Mr. McDonnell, earlier this week and over the weekend, there were reports that Labour is planning a windfall tax on oil companies. Is this true? And if so, please could you set out how your proposals would work?
Great. Okay, John.
Okay. On the willful tax on oil companies, no. No.
Pretty simple.
They are. I've leaked the manifesto already. Okay. On the issue with regard to banking, we're consulting at the moment about how we can ensure that the banking regulatory system as it now stands can be reformed alongside the Business Commission itself. And again, we'll be bringing forward further reports on that. And obviously that will be in line with the discussions that we'll have with the appointment of the new governor as well. At the moment, what we're trying to do is make sure that the Business Commission is comprehensive and includes the whole range of the finance sector. And my own view is I'd like to see banking within it, but we want to take people with us, and we'll try and build a consensus around that. But if you look at the commissions we're looking at the moment, you can see where we're aiming for in terms of the way in which companies can be properly regulated and supported, and the way the finance sector can be properly regulated and supported, but also where there's effective enforcement overall. the work that's been done towards this report, that section of it was undertaken by Professor Prem Sikka, who again, with his team, has been working with us for a number of years. They've been trying to ensure that we have an effective process of regulation, but one that's not in any way hinders enterprise, but at the same time maximises probity, of course, but also makes sure that the economy and economic agents that we have within our economy are working towards that wider social and environmental agenda that we have. In terms of the investments around, let's be clear what our programme is we've said that we will have a Green Transformation Fund of £250 billion over a 10-year programme. Alongside that, we'll be establishing a National Investment Bank, and a lot of its work will be towards the Green New Deal, the Green Industrial Revolution that we want to develop, again, over a 10-year programme, and that's £250 billion as well. So it's a £500 billion programme that's there. We believe that will lay the foundations of the Green New Deal and Green Industrial Revolution that we want. But alongside that, some of you may recall we published a report by Graham Turner about how, alongside that 500 billion over that 10-year programme we're putting forward, we also harness the resources of the finance sector so that, again, we can invest in the productive economy rather than the dominance of the investment into property speculation that there is now within the city. And we believe that the way in which this is the Mariana Mazzucato entrepreneurial straight role that she has been working on closely, we believe that state investment will unleash the opportunities of private investment, at least as much as the 500 billion of that 10-year programme to tackle what we believe should be a green industrial revolution. So yes, in some ways, the figures that we're working on are very similar to the Greens, but it's a way of harnessing both state resources alongside the investment opportunities that there are within the city. And all of that we've been talking to, whether it be asset managers or pension funds and others, all of them now are saying they're withdrawing. They no longer want to be based upon a fossil fuel economy where they can be investing now in stranded assets. What they want to do is make sure they're working alongside us in the assets that need to be invested in that will tackle climate change. And again, that's where financially they will get the most stable returns for their investment. So it is a scale. And I make no apologies for the scale of the ambition that we have or the scale of the investment we're putting in, because it's the scale of the challenge that we face, which is that existential threat. And I say it time and time again, if we don't do this now, our children, our grandchildren will never forgive us.
Great. So 3 more questions from the media. So the back row there, yes. Jim.
Jim Pickard, Financial Times. You've ruled out the very specific question about an oil industry windfall tax. Is there any kind of new tax on oil companies in the manifesto? And secondly, you talked
two
about
questions.
your changes in UK company law. Do you anticipate that would end up with more executives going to jail for...
Jim, say again, so I missed that.
So you talked in your speech about reforms to UK company law. Do you anticipate that would lead to more executives ending up in jail for various major corporate failures?
Right. So we have the gentleman next to him, and then there's a woman in front. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Ben Glaze from the Daily Mirror. John, tonight is the first ever debate, election debate, with a leader of the opposition and a prime minister. How important do you think it is that Jeremy Corbyn uses that to close the gap on the Conservatives tonight?
Yeah.
Thanks. John...
Sorry, wait.
Sorry?
Can you
Kate
say wait,
Ferguson from The Sun. Hello. John, it's been reported that Labour are due to hold an inquiry into Britain's colonial past. Do you think Britain was guilty of crimes in its past? And would you like to see reparations made?
Okay. Let's take that. Always helpful, Sam. I think, look, what's happening in our society at the moment is that we are exploring our history and our past in a new light, and actually coming to terms with it in, I think, in an extremely productive way. I went down to Bristol, and I've been to my home city of Liverpool as well, where we're coming to terms with the fact that both Bristol and Liverpool were founded The new wealth during the 19th century was founded on slavery. And so acknowledging that and understanding that, I think, is important because it teaches you lessons for the future about how peoples are exploited and how you can avoid that in the future. So I think it's incredibly valuable that we know our history proper, and it isn't just about kings and queens, etc., although they may be important, but maybe not susceptible interviews. Anyway, on the issue of reparations, we convened a international social forum about 2 months ago, in which we brought together representatives from across the global south to talk about how we can work together to tackle climate change. And we met, for example, a group of women from Mozambique, where their government had taken out a secret loan in the city, now has no resources, therefore, to tackle the flooding that's taken place in their country. It was a horrendous example. And so we said, how can we work together? And one of the issues that came up there was actually one of the best things that we could be doing. As we're developing new technology here that can tackle climate change, we share that experience and that knowledge, but we do it without cost. And I think that's one of the ways that we can actually make some reparation for some of the damage that's been done in the global south. And in that way, we learn from each other and we bring the world together. And in many ways, it's part of our commitment to conflict prevention and conflict resolution, because we don't want to see conflicts breaking out as a result of climate change impacts and the shortage of natural resources. In terms of the debate tonight, I think what Jeremy will be doing is, as he always does in these debates, explaining on the policies that we're advocating, highlighting the issues that we face as a country, and then developing the ideas that we have over recent years about how we can tackle those issues. And I think, as in all these debates, the one good thing is that enables people to see the real Jeremy Corbyn and maybe not necessarily the portrayal that in some of our media that we see every now and then. Okay. Jim, look, how many other taxes do you want me to talk about and rule in or rule out? Because whatever I say, you're going to get a story out of this, aren't you? Okay. Wait for the manifesto. Wait for the manifesto. All right, but don't hold your breath. Sorry, I've forgotten what the earlier question was before that.
Corporate.
Sorry. Where more people go to jail. I think what we're saying today is we're setting a new system and standard of corporate behaviour, and I would expect executives and others to now recognise times have moved on, and their behaviour is meant to reflect the ideas we're setting out today. And on that basis, will more go to prison? No, I don't think so. I think they may well learn the lesson, and we'll put in a regulatory architecture which enables them to do that. And therefore, I think as a result of that, we'll be able to build what we are building already, I think, which is a consensus around the standards we expect and also the behaviour we expect in terms of the treatment of different aspects of the people who make up our economy. It's interesting, you know, I've been, some of you described as the tea offensive. This tea offensive I've been having in the city and all the rest for the last couple of years, I just find people are on the same page as us now. And it is good businesses that are saying, we want a level playing field where we set standards, and those that don't abide by them, yes, we expect action to be taken against them. But I think many people hopefully have learned the lesson. And the regulatory architecture we'll put in place, I think will enable us to maintain a standard that could be world leading in terms of the behaviour and certainly in terms of the respect for stakeholders overall.
I think we'll take one more. There's a woman in front of Jim, yes? Yes. And then we'll open it out. So I think
Sam Lister, Daily Express. I just wondered if you could give us an idea of the level of personal wealth that a Labour government would find acceptable. Are you intensely relaxed, say, about plenty of millionaires in the country?
How much have you got?
As much as you.
And then we'll take a couple of questions. So the Hamish. Yeah, and the woman there.
Thank you.
There's a mic behind you.
Thank you. Hamish Sanderson, Chair of Labour Business, the business membership organisation affiliated to the party. John, as you know, we've felt for a long time that company law needs reform, that the focus exclusively on shareholder value has led to very short-term economic behaviour and poor performance. So we really welcome your promise to reform company law to look at stakeholder values. You mentioned in describing stakeholders, employees and customers. I wondered if the same logic applies to suppliers, all the way down the supply chain to some of the scandals we've seen of sweated labour and child abuse in other countries. So I hope that your view of stakeholder value would extend that far.
Okay, if you could press the mic.
Hi, Olivia Knight. I'm founder of Patchwork, which is a startup and thankfully now a stay-up business, tech business, based in London but international. As a founder and an owner of a small business, like many other SMEs, I have to open the door every morning to my employees, which naturally means I am not going to be taking on unpaid internships. I, of course, pay the national living wage as a minimum. We do have share options for our staff who work with us. We are, like many, particularly tech and new businesses and people who are starting businesses under 40, are a profit-driven business that's absolutely based on principle and purpose. And so none of these things that you're talking about come as much of a shock. They're quite common sense sort of principles for a lot of us starting businesses today. I would also say things like affordable housing, meaning that we can actually attract and retain talent in our own cities or villages, wherever you live, is crucial. National infrastructure, cheap transport is really important. Obviously, connectivity, high-speed broadband, essential. Today, I've heard a lot about big business, and that's really important, about what you're going to do with that and how we're going to handle that. But I haven't heard very much, even though those things are really useful and a lot of it's common sense to us, what are you going to do to encourage entrepreneurialism, support startups, very importantly, stay-ups. There's a lot of obsession with startups. We need to build businesses that can sustainably grow. What will you do for the SME community? Thank you.
All right, fantastic.
Okay.
Great.
Let's do with that. We're launching a separate manifesto on small businesses. I'll make sure you're there. In fact, actually, you're most probably going to talk at it now. We're launching it, and it contains most of the things we've just said. It is also about access to finance, and some of the reforms that we're looking in the finance sector to do that. That's why it's just not just the National Investment Bank and the regional arms, but the post-bank ideas that we've got. So we've got a new ecosystem of finance, basically, that we're developing, focused at SMEs. In addition to that, if you remember, we're looking at public procurement, so there's a SME preference in public procurement overall. And then in terms of, well, you've seen our stuff on broadband and connectivity, etc. We're doing the business rates reform package that we've discussed earlier, and there are a number of new ideas that we're putting in the small business manifesto itself. And the issue is trying to develop small SMEs to startups, but then it's the point you're making, is how we do the scale up. And a lot of I've been doing these every other Saturday, touring around the country, doing these meetings with local people, local businesses, etc. And all the things that you've mentioned there are the ones that come up every time, both in terms of infrastructure, particularly about broadband. That's why we did the stuff we did last week. The housing element as well, because people don't necessarily, they want to be able to live within and work within their local communities, rather than just all have to move to a large city or a town. And they've also, all of them, raised this issue about high street banking in particular as well. That's why we're going for the post-bank model. On the issue of share ownership as well, what's interesting, since I've raised this issue of the Inclusive Ownership Fund, a lot of companies have come to me and said, actually, we're developing our own employee ownership schemes, which is great. And what we're saying is, if you are, that's great, because we'll be able to take those into account when we develop the IOF. For larger companies, the IOF is for larger companies, above 250 employees, but we want to develop it right the way through. We've also developed the policy about the development of cooperatives. And one of the ideas that came up as well is the way in which you have small hubs, almost like caterpillars, but within local communities for SMEs in particular. All of that is buzzing. And we'll be doing that a couple of weeks, well, I think about 10 days' time. It's Small Business Saturday coming up as well that we celebrate. In terms of the Hamish on the reform of company law, basically what we've done is we've taken a lot of our ideas from Labour business. So if this goes pear-shaped, this is the man to blame. We've taken a lot of the ideas from Labour business because we just needed our ideas tested and honed down by those people who are on the front line of business itself. This issue about suppliers is really interesting because it relates to SMEs as well. The issue from SMEs that we get all the time is late payments. So we've said we will legislate on late payments because it is a form of exploitation of the big boys, if you like, with regard to some of the small companies. That's one of the issues we do. We've also said that suppliers are integral to the success of any company, and therefore they should be looked upon as stakeholders. And this issue you raised about what we do with regard to global connections, I think is absolutely key. What came out of the International Social Forum is that what we need to be doing now is looking at how we reform the global institutions, not just individual nation ones, but also how we make the links, particularly our country because of our history, because of our relationship, particularly via the Commonwealth in particular, but elsewhere as well, how we make those links so that we set standards here that are maintained by our suppliers elsewhere, rather than, unfortunately, in some instances, like the garment industry, the exploitation that's gone on in places like Bangladesh.
Great. So we think this is going to be the last final round. There's a gentleman here who's been very patient. If we can get where's the mic? Sorry. And then, I'll take the lady from behind and then the gentleman.
Thank you. My name is Brett from Builders Merchants Federation. That's 700 companies and 133,000 workers. My question is about net zero because my companies make all the insulation and heating hydrogen that you'll be needing. So the question therefore is, in a few weeks you could be a Labour chancellor. Are you looking at enhanced capital allowances to help develop and bring to market at a scale you will need things such as hydrogen, or for the electrical engineers in the room, batteries in homes to store the electricity so that we can bring to market all that you need?
There's a woman there who's just stood up. Can you pass the mic back to her? And then who else was...
Thank you. My name's Cathy Owens and I run a business in Cardiff. And I'd like to hear a bit more about rebalancing the economy, given that Labour's not polling very well in some of those areas where we need to build the economy. So I'm hoping that you might be able to commit that some of these new regulatory bodies might be outside London. And
Newcastle.
Could we ask for one of them in Cardiff, please? Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, sorry, we'll take the gentleman here. We're going to have to bring it back down.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Hasan Turunç. I represent Turkish Business Association. Some of the British companies also are members, 4,000 companies.
Yeah.
John, you focused on some existing issues in the economy and how you're going to fix it. But when we survey our members, both from Britain and from international economy, they talk about the trade war, upcoming disruptive technologies like 5G, 4th Industrial Revolution. What's your vision? What's your perspective on this issue? Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, they're going to run out of time. Let's
Should I do with those, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, unless you want to take another round.
Should we do one more?
Well, there's a gentleman there who's also been very patient, so we'll do the final one.
Thanks. Hi, John. Phil McCauley here. I'm an investor in companies in the UK. What is your message to Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg about the tax that they don't pay where they earn in this country, and how will you regulate that to make sure they pay where they earn?
Yeah, okay.
Great.
Thanks for that, Phil. Let me just run through these, etc. The Builders Merchants, which actually represent a company in my constituency as well, which is doing extremely well and doing a good job too. What we're launching is the retrofitting of millions of homes as part of our climate change programme. And you'll see from our manifesto the scale of the investment that we're looking at. It's huge. We'll want to be ensuring that the supply chain is in this country as well for many of those products that we go forward, and that we will be looking at the overall taxation system when we go into government. You'll see on Thursday, we've already been discussing how we review tax reliefs overall in particular, and how maybe we convert them into a much more effective way of supporting the objectives that we want to achieve. So we will be in dialogue after the election itself to enable that to happen. We want to build a consensus around this, but it's inevitable. The tax relief system itself never reviewed effectively in the past, and we've sort of historically built up a number of tax reliefs, some of which are redundant or ineffective. We want to review that, but to make sure we're not talking about reduction in scale, we're talking about making sure that it is much more effective in meeting the modern challenges that we face. And we will be bringing with us in those conversations the very people like yourselves and others who are key to that supply chain. With regard to rebalancing the regional economy, it's interesting. We're now saying that to ensure that we scale up the investment, the 250 billion in terms of the Green Transformation Fund, the 150 billion in terms of our Social Transformation Fund, the housing, schools, health that we need to invest in there, and also in terms of the National Investment Bank, we're looking at how we devolve as much of that as possible. So the NIB will have regional development arms. And again, that will be linked up with the Welsh Government and initiatives it's undertaken at the moment, but we will ensure it's got the resources it needs. We're looking at the development of regional government offices right the way around the country and ensuring that we develop hubs of the relevant government departments. We're already committed to transferring parts of the Treasury out of London. We've said the National Transformation Fund, a lot of that money will be going into the regions and nations outside of London, the South East. So we'll base the Treasury outside of that part of the Treasury outside of London. And I've also cheered up Mark Carney by saying part of the Bank of England will be moving to Birmingham as well. He might be gone by then. Although I think he quite welcomed Birmingham. With regard to the issue around companies that don't pay, we've already discussed the issue about a multinational tax. It's been a debate now that's been going on for a number of years. We will introduce one. It will be based on large-scale multinational companies. And we've been looking at the Facebooks and Googles and Amazons of this world because actually that's one way in which we will be able to afford some of the elements of the broadband rollout, those companies that actually will make the most profits from it. And again, all we're asking is for organisations to pay their way and pay it fairly. And it will be based upon an assessment of their sales and their operation in this particular country as against their overall global operation and global sales, and therefore will tax on the percentage profits we assess that are made in this country. That leads on to the international issue itself. What we're trying to do is recognise that on all of the issues that we face, we need to ensure that we recognise we operate in a global market, of course, but we operate on a planet which has common challenges. And that does mean establishing the more constructive and more effective links across the world with different partners to ensure we address the same priorities. That's why we've been looking at, when we came out of our International Social Forum, that's why we were looking at the reforms that are needed to the World Bank and the IMF and others. This is a debate that Stiglitz, one of our advisors, has been promoting, as well as Gordon Brown over the last 18 months too. And in that way, we feel we can reform those international institutions to enable us to come together on a common agenda to tackle the existential threat, which is climate change, but also to threaten that other threat, which is the grotesque levels of inequality across our globe. In that way, we believe we can introduce some of the ideas that we're trying to develop on a national basis on a global scale. That's a huge ambition, but these are ideas, I think, whose time has come. And it needs a Labour government in this country to be at the leading edge of that debate. And on December the 12th, we'll have that opportunity. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I think we can agree that John's given us there not only the vision about rewriting the rules of the economy to work for the many, not the few, but also the detail, in terms of answering all the questions that we've had. It's absolutely, I just want to say thank you to John, and also thank you to all of you as business people for taking the time to come here today and to listen and discuss and debate on this, and looking forward to our manifesto launch on Thursday. So thank you very, very much. Thank you, John.